At first, it didn't feel real. You could see the planet outside your window, and it took up more sky than the sun. And you just thought, yes, it's there, but it's not really going to... Is it?
Then it was on the news, the radio, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, podcasts, everyone, everywhere. You would read and watch theories that would try to explain it away, but you knew, in the bottom of your stomach to the marrow of your bones, you knew. Everyone is going to die.
Now that you know it is fact, a truth so real that it's carved into the crevices of your mind, what are you going to do with the time you have left?
The subjects always differ, whether it be a comet or nuclear fallout or some other form of mass destruction, and the way that people cope with this visceral reality changes in each book, movie and show where this theme prevails.
In Carol and the End of the World, we get a glimpse at a unique perspective in this doomsday scenario. The perspective of the introverted, unmotivated, the indifferent. At least that is what it seems to the people surrounding the protagonist Carol. Dan Gunneman and Kevin Arrieta demonstrate quite the opposite in this charming, sad, funny and oddly comforting limited series on Netflix. The first episode introduces us to Carol, a woman in her 40s that is facing a seemingly unique dilemma. With the end of the world at her doorstep, everyone around her is doing everything they've always dreamed to do before their time runs out. Their proverbial bucket lists are being emptied by the second. Meanwhile, Carol is struggling to connect with the sentiment itself. She doesn't want to climb Mount Everest, skydive, or party until the sun comes up and goes back down again. She barely wants to cook breakfast. In the opening dream sequence of the first episode, she is in a train listening to the ticking of her watch. But as she looks at it, she finds no hands indicating the time. She knows the clock is ticking, but there's nothing to accomplish with that fact. It doesn't matter if you don't have a schedule, a goal, a dream. In the train moving next to her is an absurd mix of symbolisms that ultimately infers that everyone else is living their lives to the fullest, while Carol sits in the empty, unmoving train next to them, with only the company of herself. She metaphorically chokes on the reality of her isolation. The opening episode of this series is spent exploring that idea. Her parents urge her to find something, to truly live before the end comes. So much so that she lies to them just to assure them that she's okay. And it breaks her heart knowing that she can't stand there and tell them that she's happy. By the end of the episode, we start to learn that she isn't undriven, it's more so that she doesn't have the same desires as the majority of people around her, desires that she doesn't even seem to know herself. Many of us struggle with this idea, having that abstract desire to accomplish but not having an anchor to turn that feeling into something tangible. It's a prevalent problem in our oversaturated lives, and why people who don't live in a first world country tend to be happier. Their problems are more fundamental and real than ours, and often or not are things that we take for granted, such as finding a meal for a day. Of course, one is not objectively better than the other, and third world countries have a lot more struggles than we can comprehend. But it's still an important comparison to draw attention to, as it can help remind the privileged of what is truly valuable. Which brings us back to Carol. At the end of the episode, she notices a woman in business attire, someone who looks accomplished, but more than that, a person who has somewhere to go. She follows that woman until she ends up at an accounting office that is somehow fully operational and fully staffed, even now. And from here, we arrive to episode 2. This episode is what motivated me to make this video in the first place, for it demonstrates an idea that I like to live my life by, and I call it Meaningless Meaning. Unexpectedly, Carol finds herself as a working employee at this office that should not be functioning.
All the people around her should be doing something else, not sitting at a desk and pressing numbers on a keyboard, right? Well, not for them, and as it turns out, not for Carol. She finds herself enjoying the simplicity and satisfaction of a job well done by filing paperwork, logging data, and returning filled spreadsheets to her co-workers. The admin assistant guide becomes her Bible, a book that she takes to bed and reads like it's her only guide to survival on a deserted island. The distraction, the office that shouldn't be, a giver of simple but effective routine that supplies her with what she was desperate for: purpose. Even if she doesn't know what they are really doing there or why, it's still better than the alternative. Her train is moving. All is good, until the day she goes to copy some documents and discovers that the printer has run out of toner. During the episode, it becomes apparent that everyone who works at the distraction is very resistant to socializing. Carol has made attempts, but so far she's barely talked to anyone, so asking for help wasn't going to work. She looks to the other printers and sees them occupied and decides to take it upon herself to find some toner. And so it begins. Carol has set her own goal. The first bump in the road becomes the company vehicle she's been assigned, a motorcycle. It takes a couple close calls, but eventually she shakes it off, figures it out, and makes her way to the first office depot. As expected, at the end of the world, the depot is abandoned. She fights off a couple wandering shelves, and by the end of her search, the toner she needs is unfound. She leaves to move on to the next, and she gets a call from Jeanette. She tells Carol about her amazing trip to Tibet, having already forgotten she told Carol about it in the last episode, and then she invites Carol to come to her Buddhist housewarming. Carol is clearly uninterested, fair, but she seems inclined to politely accept the invite. From there she moves on, throws a ball to a herd of abandoned dogs, and goes to her parents' home to water their plants while they're on their luxury cruise. And she finds a tape from her sister, who is currently living her best life in Germany. Soon after, we get this wonderful juxtaposition of the two sisters. It hardly takes a second for us to realize which bed is Carol's. She sits down on her bed and opens her yearbook, which has only been signed by her parents. Another notable example of show don't tell from the artists who animate this show. She lies down and looks to her sister's photographs of her life, so filled with adventure and excitement and memories to last. She looks and she longs. Her cocoon moves at the thought. It's difficult for me not to admire the simple symbolism used to pilot this episode. Dare I say it's elementary? A butterfly trying to emerge from its cocoon?
You just don't see those textbook metaphors too often in shows anymore. And when you do, you don't need someone like me to explain what it means.
It's effective, and it's kind of the show writers to not try to bury the episode's meaning too deep in the details, as many modern shows try to do. Moving on, Carol comes back to work to find tall stacks of paperwork on her desk and a phone call regarding the end of her probation period. With the managers looming over her and the large pile of paperwork that remains untouched, Carol needs to find this toner ASAP. Before we move on, I wanted to point out that management gives her a gun to assist in her search, which is alarming to say the least. I guess they figured she'd need to defend herself while finding the toner? Either way, it definitely fell out of the blue. Anyways, Carol heads out and spends her whole night across 5 different office depots, but to no avail. It's at this point I would have either just brought a whole new printer in, or just waited to use the other printers, but this is Carol, and this is her own mission. To do that would be to give up, and having come so far, she wasn't going to let that happen. The next day, her desk and the floor next to it is covered in paperwork, and her evaluation meeting has been moved to tomorrow morning. The stakes are higher than ever for Carol, and she only has one office depot left to search in her area, and, to no surprise, the toner isn't there either. She's run out of options. Tomorrow looks like it's going to be the last day she has at the office. Her cocoon has lost its colour. Now comes the night of Janet and Lisa's Buddhist housewarming. There's a lot to say about our relationships with others in this scene and the value we place in them. Janet and Lisa's superficiality drenches their house. After one trip overseas, they both have become Tibetan aficionados with the clothing, the furniture, the paintings, quasi-rituals, and all of the bells and whistles that they could fit into their mansion. Without drinking the goat's milk, of course, because Lisa is vegan and Janet is lactose intolerant. Carol pushes through the odd dinner conversations, and by push through, I mean she gets overwhelmed and ducks out because fair. Honestly, I wouldn't have had the guts to excuse myself like that, so good on you, Carol. She then goes for a wander through their house to the bathroom, but on the way, their printer catches her eye. And to her surprise, the toner she has been looking for this whole time ended up being at Janet's house. Finally, after all of that time and effort, finally she's found it. This was it. The end of the goal was right in front of her, until Lisa pulls her away to bring her back to the table. But no, Carol can't just leave the toner there. Her job is on the line. Quiet, unintimidating Carol fights for this toner at the price of her relationship with Lisa and Janet. She pulls out the gun given to her by management, threatening their lives for this toner. I don't think Carol would have had it in her to kill someone, but still, there was the gun. She apologizes profusely, holds all the guests at gunpoint, and walks out with the toner. She rides home, and on the way, she throws the gun over the bridge. She sleeps with this precious toner, and finally, she arrives at the office and makes her way to the printer, only to find out it has been restocked. And then something curious happens. It's the moment that inspired me to make this whole video in the first place. She went all over the city to every department to find this toner. She held her friends at gunpoint for this toner. After all of that, she gets back to the office and finds that the journey she went on was meaningless. And yet, after everything, Carol smiles. She crunches through all of her paperwork before the rest of the staff get there, and then she breezes through her evaluation meeting. After work, in the elevator ride to the ground floor, she meets Donna, who tells her that there's a closet full of toner on the 43rd floor, and they exchange names. Carol has completed her goal, and on top of that, made a workplace connection. Carol has emerged. That smile. This whole video is pretty much about that smile. Carol has politely smiled a couple times up to this point, but that was the first time I felt it. I laughed when I first saw it. Anyone else would have lost their goddamn minds about that, but not Carol. And it left me to wonder what she was smiling about. Was it the relief of knowing that she didn't have to look for toner anymore, or that she could keep doing her work? I don't think either. I think Carol smiled because even though she had a stressful time finding it, the journey was worth it. Carol had become someone new. Someone who was willing to drive all over the city in the dead of night on a motorcycle just to find something as small as a block of toner. Someone who could stand up for her needs and sacrifice friendships for her own desires. Someone that could go through all of that, find out it's meaningless, and yet appreciate what she gained from it anyways. The Carol she was in the first episode would not have been able to do that. The Carol she was now had found something she liked, worked hard for it, and absolutely nobody told her to do it. It was all her. Maybe it wasn't what her parents had in mind, but it didn't matter because she was happy. Some would have watched this episode and thought it was a bit ridiculous. Even now, they still wouldn't be able to understand why Carol wanted to work in an office at the end of the world. Everything is free, she can travel wherever she wants, she can do anything. So why this? And why is there an office filled with people doing the same? Are they crazy? Undriven? Are they the NPCs of this world? Perhaps to you, perhaps not. It's all a matter of perspective and scale. And the redundancy of what views you behold when death is in the equation. What defines a well-lived life? When you know that death is around the corner and you don't have much time left, what will you do? I would probably want to party, sing every day, eat a shit ton of chips, steal a Ferrari, get all my friends together and do something absolutely wild, and hug my parents and my siblings for a really long time. I would find every abandoned pet that I could and I'd take them all home. And then I'd take them to an abandoned deli and just let them go nuts. But if I was to say that I was just gonna read or sit on my bed and talk about a Netflix show, would you think that I'm wasting my time? Well, I would say, what's it to you? I don't want to get into religion too much or about my personal beliefs, but I'm not entirely convinced that I'll be remembering anything. And if I can't remember, does it really matter what I do beforehand? Ultimately, whatever brings you peace and satisfaction, whether it be an adrenaline rush or just stapling some paper together, in the end, they're all worth the same. You could say it's all meaningless, or that it's all meaningful. And either way, you'd be right.
Ain't it a beauty?